The dust storm rolled across the Texas plains like the wrath of God himself, and Sarah Bennett stood at the window of her family's ranch house watching it come, knowing that the tempest outside was nothing compared to the one brewing in her heart. It was May 1878, and the afternoon sun had turned an angry orange behind the wall of dirt that swallowed everything in its path. But Sarah barely noticed, because her mother's words from that morning still echoed in her mind like a death sentence she could never escape. "You need to tell him before the wedding," her mother had said, her face drawn with worry and sympathy. "Thomas deserves to know you cannot give him children. The doctor was clear about it after that fever took hold of you last winter." Sarah had known, of course. She had known since Dr. Morrison had spoken those terrible words 3 months ago, his face grave as he explained that the scarlet fever had damaged her in ways that could never be repaired. She was 22 years old, strong and healthy in every other way, but the one thing that mattered most in this harsh land, the one thing that made a woman valuable to a man, had been stolen from her. She could never bear children. She would never feel life growing inside her, never hold a baby of her own, never give her husband the sons he would need to work the land or the daughters who would care for them in their old age. Thomas Garrett had proposed to her 6 weeks ago, a practical arrangement more than a love match, though Sarah had convinced herself she could grow to care for him. He owned a small spread 20 miles south, and their marriage would join 2 properties and create something stronger than either family had alone. But she had not told him about her condition, and with each passing day, the weight of that secret had grown heavier until she felt she might collapse under it. The dust storm hit with full force, rattling the windows and sending the chickens scattering for cover. Sarah's father came in from the barn, his face covered with a bandana, coughing and cursing the weather. Her mother started closing shutters, and Sarah moved mechanically to help, but her mind was far away, trapped in the impossible situation she faced. If she told Thomas the truth, he would break the engagement. No man wanted a wife who could not give him children. But if she did not tell him, and he found out after the wedding, he would hate her for the deception, and she would be trapped in a loveless marriage with a man who resented her very existence. That evening, after the storm had passed and left everything coated in a fine layer of grit, Sarah made her decision. She would ride to Thomas's ranch the next morning and tell him the truth. She would bear the shame and the heartbreak, but she would do it honestly. She barely slept that night, rehearsing the words over and over, trying to find a way to say them that would hurt less, knowing no such way existed, but fate, as it often does in the wild territories of Texas, had other plans entirely. Sarah set out at dawn, riding her mare Daisy along the rutted road that connected the ranches. The air was crisp and clean after the storm, the sky that particular shade of blue that made the endless horizon seem like a promise of something better. She wore her Sunday dress under her riding coat, wanting to look her best even as she delivered news that would end everything. The road took her through a narrow canyon where red rock walls rose on either side, a place she had ridden through 100 times without incident. She heard the gunshots before she saw anything else. 3 sharp cracks that echoed off the canyon walls, followed by shouting. Sarah pulled Daisy to a halt, her heart hammering in her chest. Her father had warned her about bandits who sometimes preyed on travelers in these isolated stretches, and she carried no weapon except a small knife in her boot. She was about to turn back when a horse burst around the bend ahead, running flat out, and she could see the rider slumped forward in the saddle, clearly injured. Without thinking, Sarah urged Daisy forward. The fleeing horse was panicked, its eyes rolling white, and it took all of Sarah's skill to intercept it and grab the trailing reins. The rider, a man in dusty cowboy gear with a black hat pulled low, was barely conscious, and she could see blood soaking through his shirt on the left side. Behind them, she heard more shouting and the sound of pursuing horses. "Hold on," Sarah said urgently, though she did not know if the injured man could hear her. She led his horse off the road and into a narrow crevice in the canyon wall that she remembered from childhood explorations. It was barely wide enough for the horses, and it curved back on itself, creating a hiding place that was invisible from the road. She dismounted quickly and helped the man down, supporting his weight as best she could as they moved deeper into the shadows. The pursuing riders thundered past moments later, 4 or 5 men by the sound of it, their voices rough and angry. Sarah held her breath, one hand over Daisy's nose to keep her quiet, the other supporting the injured cowboy who had gone completely limp against her. They waited in tense silence until the sounds faded into the distance, and only then did Sarah allow herself to breathe normally again. "Mister?" she said quietly, trying to get a look at his face. "Can you hear me?" he groaned, and his eyes fluttered open. They were gray, she noticed, gray as storm clouds, and even in his injured state, they were sharp and aware. He could not have been much older than she was, perhaps 25 or 26, with several days of stubble on his jaw and a face that was handsome in a rough, weather-beaten way. "They gone?" he managed to ask, his voice strained with pain. "For now," Sarah said. "But you are bleeding badly. We need to get you to a doctor." "No doctor," he said firmly, trying to push himself upright and failing. "They will look for me in town, got friends there." "Then you will die," Sarah said bluntly. "That wound needs tending and I cannot do it here." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something passed across his face that she could not quite read. "You should not get involved in this, miss. Those men are dangerous." "I am already involved," Sarah pointed out. "And if I leave you here, you will bleed to death, and I will not have that on my conscience. My family's ranch is closer than town. My mother knows healing. We can get you there if you can stay in the saddle." He seemed to consider this, his face pale under the tan. Finally, he nodded. "Name's Jake Mercer," he said, "and I am grateful, though I wish you had not seen any of this." "Sarah Bennett," she replied, "and we can discuss wishes later. Right now, we need to move before those men come back." Getting Jake back onto his horse was a struggle, and Sarah had to bite her lip to keep from crying out when she saw how much blood he had lost. But he was tough, cowboy tough, and he managed to stay conscious and upright as she led both horses out of the crevice and back onto the road, heading in the opposite direction from where the pursuers had gone. She kept them at a careful pace, fast enough to put distance between them and danger, but slow enough that Jake would not fall from the saddle. Every few minutes, she glanced back at him, watching for signs that he was failing, but he held on with grim determination. The Bennett ranch came into view an hour later, and Sarah had never been so relieved to see home. Her mother came out onto the porch as they rode into the yard, her face showing alarm at the sight of the injured stranger. But Margaret Bennett was a practical woman who had raised 3 children on the frontier, and she moved into action without hesitation. "Get him inside," she called to Sarah. "Your father is in the north pasture and your brothers are in town. We will have to manage ourselves." They got Jake into the house and onto Sarah's bed since it was on the ground floor and closest. Margaret cut away his shirt while Sarah brought hot water and clean cloths, and they worked together to examine the wound. The bullet had gone through his side just above the hip, missing anything vital but tearing through muscle and causing significant bleeding. "He was lucky," Margaret said as she began to clean the wound. "A few inches higher and it would have killed him." She glanced at Sarah. "What happened?" Sarah explained about the gunshots and the pursuit, and Margaret's expression grew troubled. "We need to be careful," she said. "If those men come looking for him here, we could all be in danger." "I know," Sarah said quietly, "but I could not leave him to die." "No," Margaret agreed. "You could not. You did the right thing, daughter. We will deal with whatever comes." They spent the next hour cleaning and bandaging Jake's wound. He drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes murmuring things they could not understand, sometimes going rigid with pain. When they were finished, Margaret covered him with a quilt and stood back, wiping her hands on her apron. "He will need watching," she said. "The fever will come soon and we will need to keep him cool and get water into him. I will sit with him first. You should rest." But Sarah shook her head. "I brought him here. I will watch him." Margaret studied her daughter's face for a long moment, then nodded. "As you wish. Call me if you need anything." Sarah pulled a chair next to the bed and settled in for what she knew would be a long vigil. Through the window, she could see the sun climbing higher, and she realized with a start that she had completely forgotten about Thomas. She was supposed to be at his ranch by now, supposed to be confessing her terrible secret and accepting the consequences. Instead, she was sitting beside a wounded stranger, a man she knew nothing about except that he was running from dangerous men and had gray eyes that seemed to see right through her. The fever came that afternoon, just as Margaret had predicted. Jake's skin burned hot to the touch, and he thrashed restlessly, tangling the blankets and tearing at his bandages until Sarah had to hold his hands to keep him from hurting himself. She bathed his face with cool water and spoke to him in a low, steady voice, the way she would gentle a frightened horse, and gradually he calmed under her touch. "I am sorry," he mumbled at one point, his eyes unfocused. "Should not have brought trouble to your door." "Hush," Sarah said, pressing the cool cloth to his forehead. "You did not bring it, I chose to help you." "Why?" he asked, and there was genuine confusion in his voice. "You do not know me, I could be an outlaw, are you?" Sarah asked. "No," he said after a moment, "but those men think I am. Think I stole something that belonged to them, but I did not. I won it fair in a card game and they did not like losing." "What did you win?" Sarah asked, more to keep him talking and conscious than because she truly cared about the answer. "A map," Jake said, and he laughed, a dry, painful sound. "A map to a silver mine that probably does not even exist, but they believe it does, and they will kill me to get it back." "Where is this map now?" Sarah asked. Jake's hand moved weakly to his chest. "Inside pocket. If I die, burn it, not worth dying over." "You are not going to die," Sarah said firmly. "Not on my watch." He looked at her then, and despite the fever, his eyes were clear for a moment. "You are a stubborn woman, Sarah Bennett." "Yes," Sarah agreed. "I am." The fever broke 2 days later, leaving Jake weak but clear-headed. Sarah had barely left his side except when her mother insisted, and she felt the exhaustion in her bones, but she also felt something else, something she could not quite name. In those 2 days of caring for him, watching him fight for his life, listening to his feverish ramblings about his childhood in Missouri and his dreams of owning land somewhere peaceful, she had come to feel connected to this stranger in a way that made no logical sense. Thomas Garrett came to the ranch on the 3rd day, his face tight with anger. Sarah met him on the porch, her heart sinking as she realized she had not sent word or explanation for missing their meeting. "Where were you?" Thomas demanded without preamble. "I waited for hours." "People are talking, Sarah, saying you were seen riding with some stranger, bringing him here in secret." "It was not like that," Sarah said, keeping her voice calm though her pulse was racing. "He was injured, being pursued by violent men. I could not leave him to die." "You could have sent him to town," Thomas said coldly. "Instead, you brought him here to your home, and you have been caring for him like he was your husband or something. Do you know how that looks?" "I know how it looks," Sarah said, feeling her own anger rising. "But I did what was right, Thomas, what any decent person would do." "A decent woman would have thought about her reputation," Thomas shot back. "Would have thought about her fiancé, but you did not think about me at all, did you?" Sarah opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, Jake appeared in the doorway behind her. He was pale and unsteady, one hand pressed to his bandaged side, but he was upright and his eyes were steady on Thomas. "The lady saved my life," Jake said quietly. "And she did it at considerable risk to herself. If you cannot see the courage and goodness in that, then you do not deserve her." Thomas's face flushed red. "This is none of your concern, stranger. This is between me and my fiancé." "It became my concern when she put herself in danger for me," Jake said. "And I will not stand here and listen to you berate her for having a kind heart." "Thomas," Sarah said, stepping between them before the situation could escalate further, "I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you before, but I was afraid." She saw the confusion on Thomas's face, followed by wariness. "What is it?" Sarah took a deep breath, feeling Jake's presence behind her like a source of unexpected strength. "I cannot have children," she said, the words coming out in a rush. "The scarlet fever last winter, it left me barren. The doctor said I will never be able to bear a child." The silence that followed felt endless. Sarah watched Thomas's face cycle through shock, disbelief, and then something harder, something that looked like disgust. "You were going to marry me without telling me this?" he said finally. "Were you going to wait until after the wedding to mention that you are useless as a wife?" The words hit Sarah like a physical blow, and she felt tears spring to her eyes. "I was coming to tell you," she said, her voice breaking. "That day I found Jake. I was riding to your ranch to tell you the truth." "Well, thank God you did not make it," Thomas said bitterly. "At least I found out before I made the biggest mistake of my life. The engagement is off, Sarah. I want a real wife, not some broken woman who cannot give me sons." He turned and strode to his horse, mounting up with angry, jerky movements. Sarah stood frozen on the porch, tears streaming down her face as he rode away without looking back. She felt empty, hollowed out, even though she had known this would be his reaction. Hearing it spoken aloud, hearing herself called useless and broken, made it real in a way that nothing else had. She felt a hand on her shoulder and looked up to find Jake beside her. His face was filled with an anger she had not seen before, directed at the retreating figure of Thomas Garrett. "He is a fool," Jake said harshly. "A blind, stupid fool." "He is right, though," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I am broken. I cannot give a man what he needs. No man will want me now." "That is not true," Jake said, and there was something fierce in his voice that made her look at him. "You are not broken, Sarah. You are one of the strongest, bravest, kindest women I have ever met. You saved my life. You sat by my bed for days, barely sleeping, keeping me alive through fever and pain. You are not useless or broken, and any man who cannot see that is not worthy of you." "But I cannot have children," Sarah said, the tears falling faster now. "In this world, that makes me worthless as a wife. You do not understand. I will grow old alone, a burden on my family, pitied by everyone who knows my shame." She could not hold back the sobs any longer, and to her surprise, Jake pulled her gently into his arms, careful of his injured side. She tried to resist, knowing it was improper, but he held her firmly, and she found herself collapsing against him, crying out all the fear and shame and loneliness she had been holding inside for months. "You are not worthless," Jake said into her hair, his voice rough with emotion. "And you will not be alone." Sarah pulled back slightly to look up at him, not understanding. "What do you mean?" Jake met her eyes, and she saw something there that made her breath catch. "I mean that if you will have me, if you can see past the fact that I am a wanderer with nothing to my name except a horse and a probably fake map to a silver mine, then I want you. I want you, Sarah Bennett, exactly as you are. I do not care if you can have children or not. I care that you are good and brave and kind. I care that you make me want to be a better man. I care that when I look at you, I see everything I have been searching for my whole life without even knowing it." Sarah stared at him, unable to believe what she was hearing. "You barely know me," she whispered. "I know that you saved me when you could have ridden away," Jake said. "I know that you sat beside me for days, caring for me like I mattered. I know that you stood up to that pompous fool and told him the truth even though you knew it would hurt. I know that your touch is gentle and your voice is soothing, and that when I look at you, I feel like I have finally found something worth staying in one place for." "Jake," Sarah said, not knowing what else to say, her heart pounding so hard she thought he must be able to hear it. "I am not asking you to decide right now," Jake said, his hands still resting lightly on her shoulders. "I know this is sudden and you have just been through something painful, but I want you to know that you are not alone and you are not worthless. You are precious, Sarah. To me, you are precious." Sarah felt fresh tears well up, but these were different from the ones she had shed before. These were tears of relief and wonder and something that felt dangerously like hope. "I do not know what to say," she admitted. "Then do not say anything yet," Jake said, offering her a small smile. Just let me heal up properly and then we can figure out what comes next together. Over the following weeks, Sarah watched Jake recover his strength. He was a model patient despite his obvious restlessness at being confined. He helped with small tasks around the house when Margaret would allow it, and he charmed Sarah's father with his knowledge of horses and his willingness to listen to stories about the early days of the ranch. Sarah's two younger brothers, when they returned from their cattle drive, were initially suspicious of the stranger in their home, but Jake won them over with his easy manner and his genuine interest in their adventures. But it was the quiet moments that Sarah treasured most. The evenings when they would sit on the porch after supper, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Jake would tell her about his travels, about growing up in Missouri with dreams of seeing the frontier, about losing his parents to cholera, and making his way west with nothing but determination and a stubborn refusal to give up. Sarah would talk about her own life, about growing up on the ranch, about her dreams of having a family and a home of her own, dreams that had seemed to die with Dr. Morrison's diagnosis. "I used to imagine what my children would look like," Sarah confessed one evening, staring out at the darkening plains. "I would picture a little girl with my mother's eyes or a boy with my father's stubborn chin. When the doctor told me I could never have that, it felt like he had taken away my whole future." "Your future is not just about children," Jake said gently. "It is about everything else you can build, everything else you can be. There are other ways to make a family, other ways to leave your mark on this world." "Like what?" Sarah asked, genuinely curious. Jake was quiet for a moment, thinking. "Like building something that lasts, a ranch or a business or a home that welcomes people. Like being the person that others can count on when things go wrong. Like loving someone so completely that they never doubt their worth." He looked at her then, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "Like being Sarah Bennett, who is brave enough to stand up for what is right even when it is dangerous." Sarah felt warmth spread through her chest, a feeling she had never experienced with Thomas, even when she had convinced herself she could marry him. With Jake, everything felt different, bigger, more real. She was terrified by the speed of it, by the way her heart had started to race when he entered a room, by the way she found herself looking for excuses to be near him. But she was also exhilarated, alive in a way she had not been in months. The danger they had briefly forgotten came roaring back on a hot afternoon in early June. Sarah was in the vegetable garden when she heard horses approaching fast. She looked up to see 4 riders coming down the road, and her stomach dropped when she recognized the hard look of men who were hunting something. She ran to the house, calling for Jake, who was in the barn with her father. By the time the riders reached the yard, Sarah's whole family had assembled, presenting a united front. The leader of the group, a tall man with a scar running down his left cheek, looked them over with cold eyes. "We are looking for a man," he said without preamble. "Young fellow, dark hair, about 6 feet tall. He stole something from us and we aim to get it back." "We have not seen anyone like that," Sarah's father said calmly, though Sarah could see his hand resting on the rifle he carried. "You boys should move along." "With respect, sir, we heard tell that your daughter was seen with a stranger some weeks back," the scarred man said, his eyes moving to Sarah. "Brought him here after he got himself shot running from us. We just want what is ours." "You heard wrong," Sarah said, stepping forward despite her mother's warning hand on her arm. "And even if you had not, we do not take kindly to armed men coming onto our property making accusations." The scarred man smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "Feisty, I like that. But you are protecting a thief, little lady, and that makes you an accomplice." "I am protecting no one," Sarah said, "and I will ask you once to leave our property. After that, my father and brothers will not be as polite as I am." There was a tense moment when Sarah thought the men might try to force their way into the house. But they were outnumbered, and the Bennett men were clearly armed and ready for trouble. The scarred man's eyes narrowed, but he pulled his horse back. "This is not over," he said. That map belongs to us and we will have it. You tell your friend that when you see him." They rode off in a cloud of dust, and Sarah let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. Her father put a hand on her shoulder. "Where is he?" he asked quietly. "Root cellar," Sarah said. "We hid him as soon as I saw them coming." They retrieved Jake from his hiding place, and the family gathered in the kitchen to discuss what to do. It was clear that the men would not give up easily, and as long as Jake stayed at the ranch, he was putting the Bennett family in danger. "I need to leave," Jake said, his face set in grim lines. "I will not bring more trouble to your door. You have all been too kind to me already." "Where will you go?" Sarah asked, feeling panic rise in her chest at the thought of him leaving. "I do not know," Jake admitted. "But I will figure it out, I always do." "Or," Sarah's father said slowly, "you could give them what they want. This map they are so fired up about. Is it really worth dying over?" Jake reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of parchment, worn and stained. He spread it on the table, and they all leaned in to look. It showed a crude drawing of mountains and streams, with an X marked in the center and Spanish words written in faded ink. "I do not even know if it is real," Jake said. "The man I won it from was drunk and he might have been spinning tall tales, but those men believe it is real and they are willing to kill for it." "Then let them have it," Margaret said firmly. "Your life is worth more than a piece of paper." "I agree," Sarah's father said. "We will leave it somewhere they can find it, send them on a wild goose chase while you get clear of here." But Jake was shaking his head. "They will not stop just because they have the map. They want revenge now. I embarrassed them by winning it fair, and then I made them look like fools by getting away. Men like that do not forget." The room fell silent as everyone absorbed this. Finally, Sarah spoke up. "Then we need to make them believe you are gone, make them think you left the territory entirely." "How?" Jake asked. An idea was forming in Sarah's mind, risky and wild but possible. "We stage your death," she said. "We let them see a body, make them think you died from your wounds, and then you can start over somewhere else with a new name." Everyone stared at her. "That is crazy," one of her brothers said. "No," Jake said slowly, his eyes on Sarah. "It might work. If they believe I am dead, they have no reason to keep hunting me." They spent the next hour working out the details. Sarah's father knew of a drifter who had died the week before, a man with no family and no ties to the area. He was buried in the small cemetery near town, and with the right preparation, they could make it look like Jake had succumbed to his injuries and been quickly interred. They would need help from the sheriff, but Sarah's father had served with him in the war and he thought he could be trusted. It all came together faster than Sarah had expected. Within 2 days, word had spread through the area that the mysterious stranger staying at the Bennett ranch had died and been buried. The scarred man and his companions came to verify the grave, standing over the freshly turned earth with expressions that mixed satisfaction and disappointment. "Waste of a good hunt," Sarah heard one of them mutter as they rode away for good. "At least we do not have to worry about him causing more trouble." Jake, meanwhile, was hidden in a lined shack on the far edge of the Bennett property, waiting for the dust to settle. Sarah rode out to see him every day, bringing food and news, and it was during these visits that their relationship deepened into something neither of them could deny any longer. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and gold, Jake took Sarah's hands in his. They were standing outside the lined shack and the air was warm and still. "Come with me," he said suddenly. "When I leave here, come with me. We can go somewhere no one knows us, somewhere we can start fresh. We can build the life we want, not the life other people think we should have." Sarah felt her heart leap, but doubt followed quickly behind. "Jake, you do not have to do this. You do not owe me anything." "This is not about owing," Jake said intensely. "This is about wanting." "Sarah, these past weeks with you have been the happiest of my life, even with all the danger and hiding. You make me laugh, you make me think. You make me want to put down roots and build something permanent. I love you. I am in love with you, and I do not care if we never have children. I just want you." Sarah felt tears spill down her cheeks, but they were happy tears this time. "I am in love with you too," she whispered. "I think I have been since you looked at me with those gray eyes and told me I was not broken." Jake cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears. "You are not broken," he said fiercely. "You are perfect. You are everything." He kissed her then, soft and gentle at first, then deeper as she responded, her arms wrapping around his neck. It was Sarah's first real kiss, and it felt like coming home and setting out on an adventure all at once. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Sarah was smiling wider than she had in months. "Where will we go?" she asked. "I have been thinking about that," Jake said. "There is land opening up in Montana territory. Good land with water and timber. We could file a claim, build a ranch. It would be hard work, but we could make it something special." "Montana," Sarah said, testing the word. "That is a long way from Texas." "That is the point," Jake said with a small smile. "Far enough that no one will come looking for a dead man and the woman who saved him. Far enough that we can be whoever we want to be." "When do we leave?" Sarah asked. "Soon," Jake said, "but there is something I need to do first." 2 days later, Jake walked into the Bennett family home in the middle of dinner, causing Sarah's mother to nearly drop the serving platter. He had cleaned up, shaving and washing and wearing a new shirt that Sarah's father had provided. He looked nervous but determined. "Mr. Bennett," he said, addressing Sarah's father directly. "I know I am supposed to be dead, and I know I have brought nothing but trouble to your family, but I love your daughter and I want to marry her if you will give me your blessing. I cannot promise her wealth or an easy life, but I can promise that I will spend every day trying to make her happy and keeping her safe." The room was silent. Sarah held her breath, her eyes moving between Jake and her father. Finally, her father set down his fork and studied Jake with a long, measuring look. "You are asking me to let my daughter run off with a man who is hiding from killers, who has no property and no prospects, to some wild territory where anything could happen," he said slowly. "Yes, sir," Jake said, not backing down. "I know how it sounds, but I also know that I love her more than my own life, and I will do everything in my power to give her the future she deserves." "The future she deserves," Sarah's father repeated. He looked at Sarah. "And what do you say, daughter? Is this what you want?" Sarah stood up, her legs trembling but her voice steady. "It is, Pa. Jake sees me, really sees me, not just as a potential mother to his children or a way to join 2 ranches. He sees me and he loves me anyway. With him, I feel like I can be more than what this town says a woman should be. I want to go with him." Her mother spoke up then, her eyes wet with tears. "You will be so far away." "I know, Mama," Sarah said, going to her and taking her hands, "but I will write and maybe you can visit. And I will finally have the chance to build something of my own, something that matters." Her father was quiet for another long moment, and then he sighed. "I suppose trying to stop you would be about as useful as trying to hold back the tide," he said. "But I want a proper wedding before you go, even if it has to be small and secret. I will not have people saying my daughter ran off in scandal." Sarah let out a cry of joy and threw her arms around her father and then her mother. And then Jake, who caught her and held her tight, his face buried in her hair. They were married a week later in the small church on the edge of town, with only the family present, and the minister sworn to secrecy about the identity of the groom. Sarah wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her smaller frame, and she carried wildflowers that Jake had picked from the meadow near the lined shack. When Jake slid the simple gold band onto her finger, she felt a sense of rightness settle over her, a feeling that this was exactly where she was meant to be. The journey to Montana took 6 weeks. They traveled with a small wagon train heading north, and Sarah and Jake introduced themselves as the Mercers, newly married and heading to start a ranch. Sarah had never been farther than 50 miles from home, and she found herself both terrified and exhilarated by the vast distances they covered. There were moments of hardship, days when the heat was oppressive and the water ran low, nights when storms rolled across the plains with terrifying power. But there were also moments of breathtaking beauty. Sunrises that painted the whole world gold, fields of wildflowers stretching to the horizon, the first sight of the mountains rising in the distance like a promise. Through it all, Jake was by her side. He drove the wagon during the day and held her at night when she was tired or frightened. They talked for hours about their plans for the ranch, the house they would build, the horses they would raise. Jake had a gift for making her laugh even when things were difficult, and Sarah found herself falling more in love with him with each passing day. They filed their land claim in late July of 1878, a beautiful piece of property with a creek running through it and mountains rising to the west. The nearest neighbor was 5 miles away, and the nearest town was a full day's ride, but neither of them minded the isolation. They threw themselves into the work of building their new life with determination and joy. The first months were the hardest. They lived in a tent while Jake built a small cabin, working from sunup to sundown to get it finished before winter came. Sarah learned to cook over an open fire, to preserve food, to handle a rifle well enough to hunt for their supper. Her hands, which had been soft from ranch life, became calloused and rough. Her face, which had always been protected from the sun, tanned and freckled. But she had never been happier. On a cold evening in October, they moved into their completed cabin. It was small, just 2 rooms, but it had a stone fireplace that Jake had built with his own hands and windows that let in the light. Sarah had made curtains from fabric she had brought from Texas, and she had arranged their few possessions to make the space feel like home. That night they sat by the fire, Sarah curled against Jake's side, and she felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. "Are you happy?" Jake asked, his hand stroking her hair. "I am happier than I ever thought possible," Sarah said honestly. "I thought my life was over when I learned I was barren. I thought no man would ever want me, that I would never have a home of my own, but I was wrong. This is everything I needed, even if it is not what I expected." "You gave me a life worth living," Jake said quietly. "Before you, I was just drifting, going from place to place without purpose. You gave me a reason to stay, a reason to build something that lasts." Sarah tilted her head up to kiss him, and the kiss deepened into something more. They made love slowly and tenderly, the firelight casting dancing shadows on the walls, and Sarah felt truly cherished for the first time in her life. Winter in Montana was harsh, harsher than anything Sarah had experienced in Texas. Snow fell for days at a time, piling up against the cabin walls and making it impossible to venture far. But Jake had planned well, and they had enough supplies to last through the cold months. They spent the long evenings by the fire, Jake carving wood into useful tools and Sarah sewing or reading aloud from the few books they owned. Sometimes they would simply talk, sharing stories and dreams, learning each other in the deep way that only comes with time and proximity. Spring arrived in a rush of melting snow and sudden warmth, and they emerged from their winter cocoon ready to expand their operation. They bought cattle with the last of their savings and started building their herd. Jake proved to be a skilled rancher, with an eye for good stock and a way with horses that bordered on magical. Sarah managed the books and the household, and she discovered she had a talent for making their limited resources stretch further than seemed possible. Their closest neighbors, a family named the Johnsons, became good friends. Frank Johnson and his wife Ruth had 2 young children, and Sarah found herself growing close to Ruth, who was practical and kind. It was Ruth who noticed, one afternoon in June, that Sarah had been looking tired. "Are you feeling all right?" Ruth asked as they worked together in Sarah's vegetable garden. "You have been looking peaked lately." "I am fine," Sarah said, though she had noticed herself that she had been more exhausted than usual. "Just working hard, I suppose." But when the exhaustion continued and was joined by waves of nausea, Sarah began to wonder if something was wrong. She had not bled in 3 months, but she had been irregular since the scarlet fever and had not thought much of it. But the nausea and tiredness were new, and they worried her enough that she mentioned it to Jake. "Maybe you should see a doctor," Jake said, his face creased with concern. There is one in town. We could make the trip. Sarah agreed, though she was apprehensive. Doctor Morrison's diagnosis still haunted her, and she feared what another doctor might find. They made the long ride to town on a sunny morning in early July, and Sarah sat in the small office of Dr. Carter, an older man with kind eyes and gentle hands. He examined her thoroughly, asking questions about her symptoms, and then he leaned back with a smile that confused Sarah. "Mrs. Mercer," he said, "you are going to have a baby. I would estimate you are about 4 months along." Sarah stared at him, unable to process the words. "That is not possible," she said finally. "I was told I could never have children. The scarlet fever damaged me. Dr. Morrison was very clear." "Well, Dr. Morrison was wrong," Dr. Carter said gently. "You are definitely pregnant, and from what I can tell, everything looks healthy. Sometimes doctors make mistakes, or sometimes the body heals in ways we do not expect, but there is no doubt you are going to be a mother." Sarah felt the room spin around her. Jake grabbed her hand, his own face stunned. "Are you sure?" Jake asked. "Completely sure," Dr. Carter said. "I have delivered over 500 babies in my career. I know the signs." They walked out of the doctor's office in a daze, and Sarah did not speak until they were out of town and riding back toward the ranch. Then, suddenly, she started to laugh, a wild, joyous sound that startled their horses. "I am going to have a baby," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Jake, we are going to have a baby." Jake pulled his horse up short and dismounted, reaching up to lift Sarah down from her saddle. He held her close, his own eyes wet, and they stood there in the middle of the empty road, holding each other and crying and laughing at the same time. "I cannot believe it," Sarah said against his chest. "I thought it was impossible. I thought I would never have this." "You are going to be a wonderful mother," Jake said, pulling back to look at her face. "This baby is so lucky to have you." "We are both lucky," Sarah said, "all 3 of us." The pregnancy was not easy. Sarah was sick for the first few months, and then as she grew larger, she found the physical work of the ranch increasingly difficult. But Jake was endlessly patient and supportive, taking on more of the burden and refusing to let her overexert herself. Ruth Johnson became a frequent visitor, bringing advice and hand-me-down baby clothes and a cheerful presence that helped Sarah through the anxious moments. Their son was born on a cold February night in 1879, delivered by Dr. Carter with Jake and Ruth in attendance. Sarah labored for 14 hours, and there were moments when she thought she might not survive it. But when the doctor finally placed the tiny, squalling infant in her arms, every bit of pain was forgotten. "He is perfect," Sarah whispered, examining the tiny fingers and toes, the shock of dark hair, the eyes that would probably turn gray like his father's. "He is absolutely perfect." "What should we name him?" Jake asked, his voice rough with emotion as he looked down at his wife and son. Sarah thought for a moment. "James," she said, "after your father, James William Mercer." Jake's face crumpled and he bent down to press his forehead against Sarah's, careful not to jostle the baby. "I love you so much," he whispered. "Both of you, I love you more than words can say." The next few months were exhausting and wonderful. Sarah learned the rhythms of motherhood, the endless cycle of feeding and changing and soothing. Jamie, as they called him, was a good baby, healthy and generally happy, and Sarah felt her heart expand in ways she had not known were possible. She would hold him and marvel that this tiny person had come from her, the woman who had been told she was barren and useless. Jake was a devoted father, always ready to walk the floor with Jamie when he was fussy, or to change a diaper, or to simply sit and stare at his son with wonder in his eyes. He built a beautiful cradle from pine wood, carved with horses running across the headboard, and he would rock Jamie to sleep while singing old songs his own father had taught him. As Jamie grew from infant to toddler, the ranch grew too. Their herd increased, and they were able to hire a few hands to help with the work. Jake's reputation as an honest man and a skilled rancher spread, and they began to get offers to buy their stock at premium prices. Money, which had been scarce for so long, began to flow more freely, and they were able to expand the cabin, adding 2 more rooms and a proper kitchen. Sarah wrote long letters to her family in Texas, filling pages with descriptions of Jamie's latest accomplishments and stories about their life in Montana. Her parents wrote back with news from home, and Sarah felt the distance between them acutely, wishing her mother could see her grandson, wishing her father could teach Jamie to ride the way he had taught her. But she also knew she had made the right choice. This life with Jake, this home they had built together, was exactly where she was meant to be. When Jamie was 2 years old, Sarah realized she was pregnant again. This time there was no shock or disbelief, just quiet joy. Their daughter, Elizabeth Margaret, was born in the spring of 1881, and she was a tiny, delicate thing with her mother's dark hair and her grandmother's eyes. Jamie was fascinated by his baby sister, always wanting to help care for her, and Sarah's heart felt so full she thought it might burst. Ruth Johnson became like a sister to Sarah, and their children grew up together, playing in the creek and riding ponies and causing the kind of mischief that made their parents shake their heads and smile. Frank and Jake became partners in some business ventures, buying and selling stock together, and the 2 families celebrated holidays and harvests side by side. On a warm evening in June of 1883, Sarah and Jake sat on the porch of their expanded home, watching Jamie chase fireflies while 2-year-old Lizzie slept inside. The ranch spread out before them, successful and thriving, and Sarah felt a sense of peace that had eluded her for so long. "Do you ever think about that day in the canyon?" Sarah asked, her hand finding Jake's. "The day I found you, all the time," Jake admitted. "I think about how easily it could have gone differently, if you had ridden past, if I had died from that wound, if those men had found me. We would never have had any of this. I think we were meant to find each other," Sarah said softly. "I think all the pain and fear I went through with the scarlet fever and Thomas and everything else, it was all leading me to that moment when I would see you and make the choice to help. And that choice changed everything." "You changed everything," Jake corrected, bringing her hand to his lips. "You took a drifting cowboy with nothing to his name and gave him a reason to build a life. You gave me a home and a family and a future. You gave me everything." "We gave it to each other," Sarah said. "That is what love is it not? 2 people building something together that neither could build alone." Jake pulled her close, and they sat there as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Inside, Lizzie stirred and called for her mama, and Sarah rose to go to her, but not before kissing Jake one more time. Years passed in the pleasant rhythm of ranch life. Jamie grew into a strong, capable young man who loved the land as much as his parents did. Lizzie became a skilled rider and a voracious reader, always with her nose in a book when she was not helping with the horses. Jake and Sarah added to their family 2 more times, a son they named Thomas after Jake's childhood friend, and another daughter, Caroline, who was the baby of the family and endlessly spoiled by her older siblings. Sarah's parents made the long journey to Montana twice, once when Jamie was 5 and again when Thomas was a baby. Those visits were precious, filled with laughter and tears and the joy of multiple generations together. Margaret Bennett held her grandchildren and marveled at how far her daughter had come, from the heartbroken young woman who thought her life was over to this confident, capable ranch wife and mother. "You were right to follow your heart," Margaret told Sarah during one of those visits. "I was so afraid for you, heading off into the unknown with a man we barely knew, but he has been good to you, has he not?" "He has been everything," Sarah said simply. "He saved me, Mama, not just that day in the canyon, but every day since. He showed me that my worth was not tied to whether I could have children. He loved me for who I am, not for what I could give him. And then, miracle of miracles, we got the children anyway. 4 beautiful grandchildren," Margaret said with satisfaction, "more than enough to keep you busy." "More than enough," Sarah agreed with a laugh. As the years turned into decades, the Mercer Ranch became one of the most respected operations in the region. Jake served as sheriff for a time, bringing his natural sense of justice and fairness to the role. Sarah became known for her hospitality, always ready with a meal and a bed for travelers passing through. Their children grew up strong and good, carrying forward the values their parents had instilled in them. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1898, Jake surprised Sarah with a trip back to Texas. They left the ranch in Jamie's capable hands and took the train south, retracing in comfort the journey they had made in a wagon 20 years before. Sarah's parents were older now, her father walking with a cane and her mother's hair completely white, but they were still sharp and vital. The family gathered for a celebration, and Sarah looked around the table at her parents, her siblings and their children, her own grown children who had insisted on coming along, and she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. "What are you thinking?" Jake asked quietly, his hand covering hers on the table. "I am thinking about that girl I used to be," Sarah said. "The one who thought her life was over because she could not have children, the one who believed no man would ever want her. If I could go back and tell her what was waiting for her, what miracles were just around the corner, I do not think she would believe me." "I would not have believed it either," Jake said. "A beautiful wife, 4 amazing children, a ranch that exceeded my wildest dreams. And all because you were brave enough to help a wounded stranger and I was smart enough to see your worth. You said something to me that day," Sarah remembered. "After Thomas rode away, you said I was precious. No one had ever called me that before." "You are precious," Jake said firmly. "You always have been. I am just glad I was the one who got to show you that." They returned to Montana after 2 weeks in Texas, and life continued its pleasant rhythm. The children married and started their own families, giving Jake and Sarah a growing number of grandchildren to dote on. Jamie built a house on the northern section of the ranch and ran his own small operation. Lizzie married a teacher and moved to the nearest town but visited every weekend. Thomas and Caroline both stayed on the ranch, working alongside their parents. On a crisp autumn day in 1905, Jake and Sarah rode out to the creek where they had picnicked so many times over the years. They were both in their 50s now, their hair streaked with gray, their hands showing the effects of decades of hard work. But they were still healthy and vital, still deeply in love. They spread a blanket on the grass and unpacked the lunch Sarah had prepared. The aspens were turning gold, and the air smelled of wood smoke and coming winter. Jake lay back with his head in Sarah's lap, and she ran her fingers through his hair, the gesture as familiar and comforting as breathing. "Do you have any regrets?" Jake asked suddenly. "About leaving Texas, about the life you could have had?" "Not a single one," Sarah said without hesitation. "This life, the one we built together, is better than anything I could have imagined for myself. You gave me everything I did not know I needed." "You saved me," Jake said, "in every way a person can save another. You saved my life that day in the canyon, and then you saved me from a lifetime of loneliness and wandering. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Sarah Mercer." "And you are the best thing that ever happened to me," Sarah replied, leaning down to kiss him. "My cowboy who saw past what everyone else saw as broken and found something precious instead." They stayed by the creek until the sun began to set, talking and laughing and simply being together. When they finally packed up and rode back to the ranch house, they could see their family gathered on the porch, waiting for them. Thomas had brought his new baby daughter to show them, and Caroline was teaching one of the younger grandchildren to rope a fence post, and the whole scene was chaotic and noisy and perfect. Jake helped Sarah down from her horse and kept his arm around her waist as they walked toward the house. She leaned into him, grateful for his solid presence, grateful for every choice and chance that had brought them to this moment. "I love you," she said simply. "I love you too," Jake replied, "today and always." They climbed the porch steps together, surrounded by the family they had created, the life they had built from nothing but determination and love. And as Sarah looked around at the faces of her children and grandchildren, at the ranch that stretched out in every direction, at the mountains standing guard over it all, She knew that her story, the one that had begun with heartbreak and seemed destined for loneliness, had instead become a tale of miracles and second chances and love that conquered every obstacle. She had been told she was barren, that no man would want her, that her future held nothing but shame and pity. But a wounded cowboy with gray eyes and a generous heart had held her close and shown her a different truth. He had wanted her anyway, not despite her supposed brokenness, but because he saw her whole and complete exactly as she was. And from that moment of acceptance and love, they had built something extraordinary together, a legacy that would endure for generations. As the sun set behind the mountains and the family gathered around the dinner table, Sarah caught Jake's eye across the room and smiled. He smiled back, that same smile that had stolen her heart all those years ago, and she knew that every tear she had shed, every fear she had faced, had been worth it to arrive at this perfect moment, surrounded by love and laughter and the life they had created together in the wild, beautiful territory of Montana.